Hi, everyone. I'm Jeannie Walters. I'm founder and CEO of Experience Investigators. At Experience Investigators, we focus on customer experience. We work with our clients to provide meaningful customer experiences that drive the business forward. And for the last several months, we've been releasing tools, downloadables, guidebooks, workbooks, things that we hope you can use to improve your customer experience. Our latest release is our Customer Listening Assessment Guidebook. Now, that is something that you can access through both Year of CX at yearofcx.com or with the link available below. Now, we release new content all the time to help you move your customer experience forward, so be sure you subscribe. Today, I'll be walking through the guidebook. If you haven't already gotten that, please go ahead and grab that for yourself. But we'll be walking through how to use it and some of the questions that you can ask as you work with your team to really understand how, when, and what you're asking of your customers. Now, the idea of customer listening is a backbone to any customer experience program. But what tends to happen is organizations, as they grow into their customer experience programs, kind of put things together in an ad hoc way. And so, what I want you to do is consider how you're listening to customers and when you're listening to customers along their journey as part of the overall customer experience. It's not separate, it's part of what they're experiencing with your brand. So, let's go ahead and walk through this guidebook together. So, first of all, why are we doing this? We're doing this because as fortunate as we are to have all these amazing tools, survey tools, feedback mechanisms, sometimes what happens is we gather all that feedback and then we don't do enough with it. We don't actually take action to move our customer experience forward, to actually improve the customer journey for our customers, and to really get the results that we're looking for. And in fact, in one study, 93% of CX leaders said, yes, they use survey-based metrics. That's what they are using as their primary means of measuring CX performance. But only 6% of those leaders had confidence that their measurements helped them make better decisions. So, by really understanding how, when, and what we're asking of customers, then we are going to be able to make better business decisions moving forward. So, the idea of a customer listening assessment is to really understand what's happening today and how can we improve it, and how can we centralize things so that overall we can make better business decisions as leaders, not just CX leaders. So, excuse me. So, when we think about these different things as far as listening posts, which is often how they're referred, those are where we ask for feedback. Those are those opportunities that customers have throughout the journey to provide that feedback. But we've all heard the term survey fatigue. Because really, if we are looking at listening posts as part of the customer journey, we have to understand that they can be both negative touch points and positive touch points. So as you walk through this guidebook, I encourage you to use this to involve your team. Get other leaders involved throughout your organization because CX is a team sport. And when we are looking at the way to do this, we can't do this alone. We have to involve people throughout our organization. So using this guidebook is a great way to operate, to really collaborate with your fellow leaders throughout your organization. You can also involve your customers. Make sure you're validating with them, asking them about their experience with these different listing posts. And then, of course, use the tools you already have. We have some foundational tools that we recommend here. One is a CX mission statement, and one is a CX success statement. You can find workbooks for both of those in the Year of CX. So go ahead and check those out as well. So as we walk through this, I think there are three things I want you to remember. One is that when we talk about listening posts, we have to think about them as part of the context of the bigger customer journey. If you don't know your customer's journey, this will still help you understand it, even if you don't have a journey map yet. But if you have a journey map yet, it's great to do this assessment kind of on top of that journey to get that understanding about where these listing posts are. So let's go ahead and walk through. So there are three exercises in this guidebook that we'll be covering. The first is we're going to find out where that customer feedback is collected. Now, this is super important because sometimes we make assumptions about where we're asking for feedback. But if we ask people throughout our organization, we can find a lot more information about this. We also want to identify where customers are already sharing. As much as we collect feedback and ask for it specifically, customers talk in all these different places. We have to make sure we keep our finger on the pulse of that feedback as well. And then we want to review how and where the data is collected. What are we doing with it? How is it used? And how are we sharing it throughout our organization? That's what we're really going for, is how do we use this feedback to drive better decisions? So let's start with number one. We need to find out where this customer feedback is collected. Now, in the guidebook, you'll see these 5 questions that really are about walking through, okay, let's figure this out. How are we currently collecting feedback? What are the specific moments in the customer journey? Now, when we do this and when you think about these things, one thing to consider is that as companies grow and as companies encourage more customer feedback collection, what tends to happen is one manager comes over from another company and they say, well, this is the tool we used over there. So I'm going to use this tool to survey just my customers, right? So maybe a marketing director wants to know just those customers who have attended some webinars or things like that. Then you have somebody over in the contact center and they say, well, this is the tool we used at my last job, or this is the tool that was approved recently. And they're using a different tool to collect that feedback. Then there are people in your social media team who are providing assessments, doing some analytics, things like that to find out sentiment analysis, for instance. You have all these teams working independently, and they're all trying to get feedback from the customer. But if we're not talking about, okay, how are we doing this? Who's doing what? Then it becomes very cumbersome, both for the customer and the organization. So that's really the heart of what we're trying to get at in this first step. Where is customer feedback really collected? Who's doing it? How are we doing it? And just let's get an audit of that. Let's make sure that we are listening and listing out all those different places so that eventually we can put this in a more strategic way, in a more centralized way. So as you walk through these questions, this is a great way to think about it. How are we actually putting this into something later that can be centralized and more strategic? So as you walk through these questions, you're going to just collect in this first phase. This is really straightforward. It's about really just listing everything out. Once you get these things, once you figure out where you're actually collecting this, then you want to reflect on that a little bit. You want to figure out, are there clear organizational rules here? And if not, what does that mean? And what do I mean by clear organizational rules? Well, just like anything else, if we don't have a way to communicate and to understand what are we actually trying to do here, then I might make a decision that's different than another leader in the organization based on my individual goals or based on my departmental goals. We want to put some governance around this. We want to make sure that we have those rules so that everybody understands, for instance, how to best design a survey. What are the things that we know are hard truths? And for instance, do we want to send out a survey of 20 questions? Probably not. That has to be the exception. So what are the limits to questions? What are we really trying to get at? What if we have already asked the customer this? So we want to look at all of those things and provide some clear organizational direction on that. So is there governance is basically what this section is all about. And if not, this will lead you to figure out where are those gaps in the rules, in the way the organization approaches feedback so that you can create better rules and strategy moving forward. So let's move into the next step. So this is where I want you to think about where customers are already sharing. Because what tends to happen is once we have these survey tools, these mechanisms, we start relying on those pretty heavily. And you could see that in the stats that we shared in the beginning. We get that feedback in, and it's really easy to kind of think, okay, this is everything that our customers want us to know. But we have to remember that when we're asking for feedback, there's a certain group that will never give it to us. They will just never respond to a survey request. We also are asking after the fact. So it might be a week, it might be a month. So some of that memory will shift as well. So while it's great to get feedback through surveys, they're always a little late and they're not necessarily when the customer wants to give us that feedback. When we look at things like social media, user forums, communities, customers are giving feedback proactively. Sometimes they don't even think they're giving it to the brand. They're just sharing in their peer network. If you can identify those places where your customers are already talking, then you can really dig into more qualitative feedback. You can find things that maybe aren't showing up in your data right away because it takes a while for things to show up in data. But if you see something in a forum, for instance, where your customers are saying, this is really painful, and that can also direct what you want to explore in your surveys. So, for instance, if customers are sharing in a forum and saying, this part of the purchase process stinks and we don't like it and everything else, you can go back to your surveys and make sure you're asking specifically about that moment. But better yet, you can start making the real changes to your customer journey. You can start prioritizing certain improvements. So, how is this feedback monitored? How are you doing that within your organization? Are there people who are responsible for really paying attention to these places where customers communicate? And then what's actually happening with that? These are the questions to think about in step 2. And then finally, we have all of our frontline workers, we have contact center agents, we have all these people who work directly with customers. Do they have a place to put their feedback? Because they are hearing things that other people in the organization just don't have access to. Do you have a place to put that? Do you have a repository where they can collect feedback as well? So look at all of those places that are a little more nuanced, a little less structured, where customers are sharing, because that's part of customer listening for sure. And then once you do that, you can actually really start identifying, okay, what are the steps we're going to take? Who is monitoring these things? What does our organization expect when we are collecting this feedback? What do customers expect in terms of acknowledgement? Closing the loop with this type of feedback is a little different than closing the loop with surveys. When we send out a survey or get direct feedback from a customer, we want to close that loop with them. If they are sharing on social and they're not necessarily alerting the brand, that is a little bit different. So the way that we close the loop, we want to make sure that we're respecting the personal boundaries of people, and we're also acknowledging things maybe at the macro level and saying, hey, we heard from a lot of you about this. This is what we're doing about it. Instead of going directly to that person who didn't call out the brand, but we recognize that that's what they were complaining about. So all of these things require a little nuance, a little understanding, but that's why it's so important to think about this as part of your overall customer journey. So, and then that last question, are there places where customer facing employees can really collect this feedback? And then what happens to it? So essentially, the listening assessment is all about these 2 steps throughout, where we collect, we understand what's happening today, and then we follow up with, okay, what are we doing about this? And that's what this 3rd step is all about. How is the data being used in your organization? How are we collecting it? How are we using it? And how are we sharing it so the right people understand the feedback and can take action on it? So, do teams have the right tools and technology? This is a really important question, because if we have disparate tools throughout the organization, if we don't have a way to centralize this data, then we really don't have visibility into the customer's journey and into what they're trying to share with us. If everybody has visibility into this customer feedback and can understand it, then that's going to respect the customer more. We're going to understand their journey. We're going to be able to recognize them for who they are and where they are on their journey, which is an incredibly important factor in how customers feel about a brand today. They are reporting that they want to be seen and recognized for who they are and where they are on the journey. So if we are sending 4 different surveys that ask similar things and never closing the loop with the customer, they're going to get frustrated. They're going to feel like they're not being respected as where they are on their journey. So make sure that as you think about the tools and technology, think about how can you centralize that data so that people can really have visibility into it. That's really critical. And then we also want to think about who's doing what here. Who's responsible for acting on this feedback? Who are the people that we need to get involved? Because this is not something that one CX leader or the contact center can really handle. We need to make sure that the improvements along the journey and that the complaints that we hear are addressed, that the issues are resolved. The only way we can do that is if everybody understands their role and their responsibility. So I hope this helps as you move forward because we want you to consider these listening posts and how you collect feedback as part of the overall experience for your customers. If we don't do this, it can feel very much like one team is over here working on feedback and gathering insights, and then those insights are not driving the business forward. And that's what customer experience is all about. So we have some additional resources for you. You can check out our site at experienceinvestigators.com. You can subscribe to this channel where we share different tools and techniques and content with you. And then, of course, don't forget about the Year of CX, yearofcx.com. All the links are in the description, so check those out. And leave a comment for what else you want us to talk about in these videos. I wish you great luck with your customer listening assessment and gathering feedback, but more importantly, making that change, improving the customer experience. The mission of our company is to create fewer ruined days for customers. And by being here with me, by learning about this, and by dedicating yourself to improving customer experiences at your organization, you're helping me do that. So thank you so much. I'm Jeannie Walters. I hope to see you again soon. Thanks.